Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Kent Mullinax. I'm the director of the Booth Art Academy, just about a block away from here. And we're going to be doing our program shortly. I have a few quick announcements to make first, just about some things that are on exhibition here at the museum. Upstairs in our Picturing America gallery, we have the photography of Cody S. Brothers. So if you get a chance, walk up there for that. In our special exhibition gallery, we have Western American art south of the Sweet Tea Line. And it's 60 pieces that we've gathered from across the southeast of Western art. So that's up there. And then in the temporary gallery is Concept to Canvas. And that's 6 artists, and it is exactly what it says. It talks about the process of getting your idea onto canvas, and Michele is part of that. So after the program today, run up there and take a look at that as well. And then our next member opening is coming up February 21st, which is in reference to the Cody S. Brothers exhibition. So that has gallery walks and receptions tied to that as well, and that's February 21st. So a couple of quick things on why Michele is here. At the Art Academy, once a year we have an artist in residence program, and so Michele is that this year, and she'll be down there for the next week and a half, give or take, and she's going to be doing several things. She's got a workshop coming up next week that has been very popular. It was almost full as soon as we opened it up, and there's like a waiting list of almost 20 people on it as well. So that very good reception to that. She did a talk this morning with our staff and our docents, and then she's doing this program today, and then next week she speaks to our Artist Guild on Thursday night of next week. So lots of things during that week and a half, but the main thing that she's here for, and we have set up a temporary studio for her in the Art Academy, and so she's got easels and all her stuff there, and over the next week and a half she's going to be working on a painting that's going to become part of our permanent collection here at the museum. So it'll be on the wall before too long, and she's working on that now. And if you get a chance, she probably won't do a ton of painting this week. She's getting kind of set up, but over the next several days, she's going to be painting, and you guys are welcome to stop down there during regular business hours and maybe talk to her while she's painting and take a look at how she's doing with that. So, and that'll be up on the walls before too long in the museum. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to her, and she'll talk to you.
Thank you. I'm live. Thanks, Kent. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I feel like I've spent so much time between our show that opened in November and teaching and back again, so it's always really fun to be back in Cartersville, and especially at this. I'm going to move this. I'll kick it. Especially at the booth, which is just such an amazing exhibition space with some amazing art. A quick show of hands today. I'm wondering who here are art patrons, art appreciators, art lovers? Of course. And then who here is anybody an artist who's here? Both. We are collectors, our patrons, the people that just appreciate and love art so much are integral to us as artists. So we just appreciate all of that. In keeping today, I wanted just to talk about, we've got the Concept to Canvas show that Kent mentioned upstairs. Have you all had a chance to take a look at that? It's really fun because as artists in different venues, you see the final piece, but I think a large part of the puzzle is what goes on in the artist's mind as they are creating that piece and the thought process behind the piece. So basically today, I'm going to walk you through my process. So I want to kind of tag on to the Concept to Canvas show that we have going, and also fill in, because this is what I'm thinking as I'm creating the piece for the permanent collection. So I wanted to share my process, and then at the very end, I'll share with you the piece that I blocked in that I'll be working on this week for the permanent collection. So I'm going to start one. So my process, it's very analytical. Before I begin a painting, I usually plan it in my head for about 3 to 4 days in advance. I've picked the subject, and then I'm thinking about what medium I want to use with that painting, what size I'm going to create that painting in, what medium I'm going to use, and then I have all these different components that come together to create a successful painting. So, if you're an artist, people sometimes say, well, is it the most relaxing thing that you do? And I'm like, oh, it's the farthest thing from it, because in my mind when I'm creating, I am totally focused on what I'm doing, but there's all these voices in my head that are talking about, do I have the right values? Do I have the right colors? Is the composition intriguing and interesting? Do I have lost and found edges? Do I have saturated and desaturated colors? There's a lot of elements that come together that create a successful painting. So I thought I'm going to walk through a series of slides of showing you kind of my artistic license that I take and my thought process as I create each painting that I do. And one thing I want you to really take note of, and I think which is probably the most interesting part for me, is how my reference photo varies from the final painting. So you'll see early on all of the decisions that I'm making when I create my piece to make that piece my own. I'm never feeling like I'm stuck using the particular reference that I have. These are all studio paintings. So I've used, because of the photographed reference photos, but I do paint in plein air as well. I think it's really important that as an artist, you take time. If you're a plein air painter, it's important to spend time in the studio, because that's your time to work out some of your technical issues with painting. Drawing being the most important foundation to creating a successful painting is being able to draw. Composition, all of the technical side of art, you need to have studio time to be able to address those. On the flip side, if you're only working from the studio from photographs and you don't get a chance to paint outside, you don't understand true color, because we all know photographs as reference photos aren't that accurate. They lie to us. So the darks are usually too dark and the lights are too light. And if you were to take your easel, your setup outside and just do some color studies, you'd see that there's so much light and color in the light areas, and there's such beautiful color in the shadows. So it's really important to have those two disciplines if you are painting. Even as an art lover and appreciator, I can go through a series of paintings and I can tell which ones were done just from studio and not from somebody who doesn't understand color from life, because the darks will probably be way too dark and the lights will be way too washed out and too bright. So taking both those disciplines and combining them is really a key component to creating a successful painting. As we go through these, please ask questions. I want to have a dialogue going back and forth too. I don't want to be talking at everybody the whole time. This is in oil. And I use all different mediums. And so in my planning stage before I start, I also decide, what medium is going to tell my story the best. So when you look at this painting, obviously reference photos on the left, and it kind of just is an example of when I talked about the darks being too dark. So the dark almost look black, but if you were out on the pier painting this at night, there would be a lot more life. The values of those paintings would be, the darks would be a lot lighter. So my painting is just an interpretation of this scene. Really wanted to focus on the sparkling light hitting the water. Just another example, there's a strange band going through this. I think I must have overlaid two paintings. But again, the whole purpose of this talk is creative license and finding your own artistic voice and making color choices. And you'll see as we get into the slides, some of these color choices are a lot different than the reference photo. But darkest, if you really looking at values on this, when we look at the reference photo on the left, the little snag that the bird is sitting on, that's your darkest part of your painting. So you want to make sure that nowhere else on that painting do you have a dark as what you're seeing in the foreground. And so that's why as you move back in the painting that I did into the horizon line, the darks that are seen under the foliage, I've lightened the values up on those, so that helps to give that feel of atmospheric perspective in the painting. Bringing in down on the branch that the bird's standing on, some really high key color notes. If you notice, there's the green and some of the pink color notes, pink and green being complementary colors, so I bring those into the painting to create some energy and contrast in the work. So I believe, there's a difference between a painting that's pretty to look at and it's well drawn, executed. There's pretty paintings, and then there are paintings that just reach out and grab you, and they kind of drag you in, and they really they're asking you to get closer and look closer. So all these little color notes that I use are an effort to really keep the viewer interested in the painting and moving through and around the painting. Even elements like I think it's the architectural background in me, but even elements, the linear elements, like on the right side, if you see that grass or that stem coming off the branch, it's kind of leading your eye back into the bird. So it's making sure that those horizontals aren't bringing your eye off the canvas. So how I work, it's the push-pull, because I'm trying to create works that are abstract and energetic and free-flowing, but the base of them is extremely methodical and planned. Every element has a purpose on each of these paintings. Yeah. Because this is the painting about the bird, that's a good question. I felt that looking at the reference photo, there's too much negative space as far as in the water surrounding the bird, and I wanted to kind of bring the bird more into the scene and have the scene support the bird. So that was an artistic decision to manipulate that horizon line, which is, it completely would be up to the creator to decide to do that or not. But I wanted the bird to break the plane of the horizon, just to really reinforce that bird is close to you. Just a really busy street scene. I didn't change much with this particular scene. You can see, though, obviously very much a lighter value on the sidewalk. And also in a lot of sidewalks are gray, but I chose to play off kind of the warm color in the canvas awning of the flower vendor. I chose to complement that with some of the cooler, more lavender blue tones in the sidewalk. So that is an example of using temperature shifts. So warm colors being yellows, the oranges, the fire colors, playing against the cool colors, which are the watercolors, the blue, the lavenders, violets. So creating those contrasts in those that creates that energy in that painting, because I want the viewer to come look closer. Look at once again, talking about values. I consider myself a colorist, and I love color. I have to always refrain. I have to hold myself back, because it would be really easy for me to put bright color everywhere. But you'll notice I keep the bright colors, the most saturated, highest chroma color, where I want the viewer to look on the flowers, right in the foreground. And then everything else is less saturated, so everything else is grayed down. So it's that use of gray against the high key color notes that I use that makes it look colorful, but it really makes that color in that focal area pop.
Is this one watercolor?
This is an oil. Yep. I also, another element that I try to achieve in my paintings is a tactile. I like the textural, tactile quality. So I really try to work thin. I love thin washes as I build up to the very thickest impasto in the focal areas. So tactile, to me, that texture in a painting also gives it that energy and that life to it. Take a look at this and at the reference photo and compare it to the final painting, and you can see elements that I left out. Yep, yep. The building on the left, that's behind that, really had nothing to do with my idea of what this painting was about. This painting was about these beautiful colors, flowers in the foreground. The building in the back I thought was distracting if I had put it in. And also because of the warm color of that awning, I knew I wanted a cool color note behind it to support it. Yes? Are you the photographer? Yep. My poor family, because, when my kids were little, we'd be walking, I'd take a picture, I'll go, wait, I need to take a picture, and they would all, you guys, no, sorry, I need the scene, and they're like, oh, okay, so, yes, yeah. Yep, I take my own photos. I mean, once in a while, something will really spark me, and I'll ask a friend, can I borrow this photo, but I take my own photos, and then I set them up just as I would, like if I'm at the easel, kind of compositionally, I try to set them up. Yeah?
So when you start this, you do a pencil sketch, like more detailed than a thumbnail, and like readjust the people a bit.
Yep, good question. I always will start with I don't do a color study, but I will start with a no tan, which is just a black and it's a grayscale study. So I use those initial studies for composition. So I'll sketch the scene as I see it, and then I'll use the value. Have you all seen the value markers? It's just from black to gray, and then I'll establish my values, get the darkest darks in, and then I will use that sketch to kind of crop and kind of revisit what that scene's going to look like. So I always do a value study, especially important when I'm painting in plein air, because plein air, I don't have that time to think about it for days ahead of time. The nature of plein air is you go out and you get going, but I make myself stop and do a study, kind of slows me down, take a breath, and then I work on establishing my scene and the values before I move forward. Also manipulated the colors on the figures a little bit, just to kind of create the color harmony that I'm trying to achieve. And then again, the darkest darks are underneath in the shadows of that little flower building, and then the darks behind that you see behind the building itself, they're not as dark. So using very slight but deliberate shifts in value to kind of create depth in the painting. Really terrible photo. I didn't take this one, by the way. But just an example of how overexposure, darks in a photograph can be way too dark. Again, one of my themes with this was color shifts. So really pushing the gold, the warm of the reflection of the trees on the left side of the water, and how that plays against the right side of the water, and the cools on the right side. Also brought down, as you can see, the foliage that on the right side, where the line is going that direction, as almost like a period at the end of a sentence. So I wanted some color note on the edge of that canvas to stop the viewer's eye, because the way the fishing pole is going is such a strong element leading your eye off the canvas, and I want to try everything I can to keep the viewer within my painting. It's kind of an old joke, artists, that we're at a plein air event or an art show, and everyone has their paintings set side by side, and you don't want any element that's going to take the viewer to the next painting. You want them to stay focused and moving through your work. So all those, like, think about it like that, like I say, a period at the end of a sentence, like ways to keep the viewer in your work and not moving any strong forms or linear elements, taking them off. The other thing you can notice in this one, especially if you saw it closer in person, is I tone my canvas. Whatever medium I'm doing, I'll tone it with a fine, bright gold metallic, either oil or acrylic paint, depending on what type of medium I'm using. And then I use that, like the line of the fishing underneath the pole, and some of the background notes, a lot of it is scraped away. So I'm also taking away paint as much as I'm laying paint down.
And I like how you connected palette. You put pink here, and so you put pink short on him too, and the water reflection. That's pretty.
Yep, and element, using the elements. The yellow hat worked. I kept that yellow hat. It's kind of rare that I keep the colors as I see them. Another thing I do a lot is if I am working off a reference photo, I look at it in black and white. And then all color choices are just what I deem appropriate for that painting. Someone this morning asked if I do commissions a lot, and I used to do them, but it's just hard when I have to be forced to stay with trying to create an image that's exact or colors that are exact. It ruins my creativity. So, hopefully this inspiration is inspirational as an artist or as an art lover to, really look beyond and look toward paintings that have that little extra thought process that's gone into them to make them really special. Just a misty morning float trip, and once again, this is more tonal for me, but I do have all the elements of darkest darks are on the figures because they are closest to me. As I move back, that concept of atmospheric perspective means that your values are going to have to get lighter as you move back into the background of a painting, because you've got more space and more air and more atmosphere between what's closer to you and what's farther back. So that use of grading the values is really important tool when it comes to creating depth in a painting. The reference photo is very green and very warm, but really wanted to bring in some of those cools to create an interesting passage, and then also really a use of some really thick impasto paint to create interest right around the boat, which is the focal area. Any questions? The first time I used to follow reference photos or the scene so verbatim, and I was painting a good friend of mine in Washington, Ned Mueller, who's been around forever, and I was painting in the woods, a little cabin in the woods. It was brown cabin, brown trees. Of course, it was a Washington State gray day, and Ned said, "You need a yellow slicker on that door hook." And I'm like, "Oh, there's no yellow, no, oh God, there's not a yellow slicker on." He goes, "You need the color note," and it's exactly, I've taken that to a whole new level with my ability to change color up, but it really did kind of break me out of that mold of having to paint exactly what's in front of me. I used to always, for whatever reason, want to put a red color note in everything, and I do have a really favorite color. It's called violet gray. It's an Old Holland color, which is more of a lavender. It's like quinacridone rose and ultramarine blue, white, and a tiny little bit of yellow ochre. I could put that color everywhere, but I've gotten out of that really as much now. I'm more intrigued with kind of the natural color of whatever that painting is, so I don't have that need to put those colors. Or like somebody who wants to sign in a red on a winter scene. It's like, well, let's make it consistent with the scene. Yeah. Do you have a question back there? Can you say that again? There? Oh, what color? Is your question the color? The little one that you see. Oh, good question. So that, I'm carrying, we talked about the cool, bringing in the cool color notes with that. And I didn't want the back beyond the horizon line into the background to disappear completely. I still wanted to bring your eye around it. And so it's a little bit more saturated and intense, that same color right around the boat, but it's a little grayed down, but still the same family of color back in that background. So I just wanted to make sure that your eye kept traveling beyond the boat into the background and then back down around using some of those vertical cuts. And then come down with that scratched in reflection. Yeah, so I kind of think of painting almost like Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs. Because people will say, well, what about these color notes? Well, they're all specifically planned to lead you in and around the painting. Was there another question? Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that, is it for you better put focal point on the left or on the right? Because I know in European culture, usually they always like predominantly put it on the right side, like on the right side of the three-quarter, wherever it is.
I think. Can you repeat the question so everybody can? Yes. Do I predominantly have an area like right or left for my focal area? Is there one that I prefer? And to answer the question, I don't consciously pick a side, although like when I'm out or looking off a reference photo, it doesn't matter to me where the focal area is, but it has to be up higher than mid canvas because I want to bring the viewer into my canvas, into my painting, typically. It just depends on the particular scene, but I do find that when I'm setting up a still life, I tend to set it up with like reading left to right. So I tend to set it up with focal area like in the upper left portion or mid to upper left, and then a secondary focal area to the right. Yeah, that's an interesting question, yeah. Oh, I'll go back. This is just on one of my walks in my neighborhood, and it was that spring, not here, but in the mountains of Montana and Alaska, we really love our spring breakup, and we love when we can finally see sun, but it's also pretty depressing because the ground is just so brown. So this was just a study in temperature, and I really wanted to create this little passage where the light was hitting, and so just really pushing some of those warm color notes into those golds and peaches, kind of against the lavenders and the cool of the aspen trees and the birch trees in the shadows.
Did you use your gold metallic underpainting for this one?
I typically start, I don't like to work on a white palette or a white canvas or substrate because I can't really see my colors that clearly, but it's also a little bit confusing when I am starting with that golden color because when I put my highlight in, it doesn't pop until I come back in with the background and carve it. This is gouache. This was a demo I did. I was down in Australia for an event in October, and this was just I really wanted to do with the students. They wanted to talk about water reflections, And so this is about water and the boat in the water, but, and also it was an exercise in how to make that painting enjoyable and work for me. So you can see with this piece, the cools in the water. I wanted to have the blue water, but then really coming back in with that mid-ground behind the boat to support the boat with the ochre, the warm ochre, popped up the color of the boat, the value and the color, and then needed, with all this foliage that I put in the background of green, I chose to add that yellow or that red buoy, just to add that color note, just to make sure your eye goes right to that spot, and then to also complement all the green that was in there. You know, from my view, so this was a plein air piece, and from my, you know, made sure I don't go anywhere without my little kindergarten ruler. So I always make sure my horizons are straight, my verticals are straight. I can lose them later on, but in the drafting stage, I want to make sure that all of my angles, that I'm creating that platform for my work that I can grow on. So it's a very interesting approach because I start out very, very rigid. I really want to have that strong foundation, and then I lose it and loosen up. But I really have that base, and I'm very, very much interested in balance too. So I want to make sure that I've got elements that are in my painting that are keeping it balanced. We talked this morning about like an old-time scale that you would have on your kitchen counter, or the apple and a plum. I want my paintings to be balanced. So that means if I have an element like on the right, I have got a boat going off the canvas on the right, then I want to counter that balance with a note of color note going off the left. Yeah.
And the colors also, I like that you put that violet.
What's the difference of working in oil and working in gouache? Is there like a mental shift?
That's good question. We talked about that this morning. I approach it the same way. I think about the process. I think about what I'm doing. I think about my goals with each piece. I will address the canvas the same way, but there are inherent differences I have to account for. So when I'm painting in oil, I really need to put the stroke down and leave it. If I keep trying to go back over, I'll create mud. And so it's really important that I have direct painting. So every time I put a stroke down of paint, I have to make sure it's exactly what I want to paint. So I try to put it down and leave it with oil. When I'm painting with acrylic or gouache, because it dries so quickly, I can give it a few minutes to dry, and then if I need to come back in and do something, I can go back over it. There's a limit to how much I can layer with those two before the painting starts to look overworked as well. But the application of paint is a little bit different. Also, an important thing also is lost and found edges. So what I mean by that is a lost edge is an edge that's feathered, blended, if you have a very soft, muted painting, the viewer's eyes just goes all around it. But when you have a hard edge, so a stroke against a stroke that's not blended, that will draw your eye, the viewer's eye. And that's where I put my focal area, the hardest edges. But with gouache and acrylic that they dry so fast, I end up taking these hard edges, and I've got this color and this color. I mix a color between them, and then I go back over the edge to lose those edges. So a couple inherent different things, but I still build it the same way, starting with darkest darks, and I go right to my focal point, and I work out from focal point.
So your soft edge, this is all new to me, so I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. Is that the violet gray on the left and right edges?
Is the what? They don't have violet gray in gouache, but it is a quinacridone red and a ultramarine. Mm-hmm.
So that's your soft edge.
Yep. hard edge would be where the light on the back of the bow or the stern. I rode crew too, and I forgot. I was facing the wrong way. I always get confused. The back where the light, that's a hard edge, because I want the viewer to go to where that light hits the back of the boat, and I also have a harder edge on the red buoy as well. Yeah. Very soft muted edges on the green in the background. This was just a little bouquet I set up in my kitchen window that became this. So, just complete creative light. This is acrylic, actually. But I just hope to inspire, when you're viewing art, to look for some of these elements that I think makes art really great. And when you're creating your own art, really give yourself that flexibility and that permission to make some of these design choices that's going to really make a painting sing and make it have your own voice to it. And I guess I'll say too, if you get a chance to come watch, I love to share my process. I am a negative shape painter, so I will, like I say, I'll lay in my darkest darks and then I'll move right to my focal area. I don't worry about the background. I don't worry about the background color. I don't even know what that color is going to be till I get there. And then I come back in when I'm ready and I will reshape my focal area with the negative space behind it. One thing that does is it allows me to paint and put paint next to paint, so I'm always comparing. And my values are always going to be perfect, because I'm not going to put anything down that's darker than what I've just laid down. And I guarantee most of my students, if we're out painting plein air and you're painting a scene with distant mountains and you jump right to those distant mountains and paint them before you paint your focal area in the foreground, the mountains are going to be too dark. 99% of the time, because you don't have anything to compare it to, because you can't put paint down unless you have already paint down to compare what you're putting down. So for me, it's a constant comparison of what I've laid down versus what I'm putting down. It's a really bad photo. And this was at the Buffalo Bill show at the Buffalo Bill Museum of the West, and I was like, that's a pink tree? I'm like, yep, that's a pink tree. But I really just, the focus was on the figure in the foreground, and then really wanted to come up with a combination of some just warm and cool colors, but wanted that cooler lavender tree in the background, because I wanted the viewer to kind of follow the line of the fly and come back down into that lavender passage in the water. This is outside of Cody as well. Another example of manipulating the reference photo, adding up in that midground, the herd up there, but also wanted to focus on the high key, that chartreuse green in the midtone. So I didn't want to have anything conflict with it in the foreground, so I really cooled down and went more with the sage type tones and much more grayer, leading your eye up into the, and then those values as you get to the back just receding. All of the trunks in the back are just scraped out. So if you were to look at that closely, it's just that toned canvas coming through. And then the color. If you look closely at each of the bison too, they're warm where the sun's hitting them, and then they're much cooler in the shadows. So to kind of create that interest with them as well. Another very bad photo, but I did take this one. And so darks, how dark it's the reference photos showing the darks. And and, changing the color of the boats, really kind of taking down that high saturated colors that I'm seeing in the reference photo. This, staying pretty true to the photo, just bringing the boats a little bit closer and more intimate with you. Yes, sorry. The color I toned the canvas with, that it's a gold, it's a metallic fine gold. Yep. And so in acrylic, it's a golden acrylic called fine gold bright. In oil, I'll use an M-gram color called quinacridone gold. Lots of scraping. Yeah.
Like the Dutch masters and stuff, they used to copy each other. Who are your influences that you like to pattern your work after?
So we talked about that this morning. I'll just kind of reiterate the same. So when I first started painting, Nikolai Fechin was one of the Russian impressionists. I loved his use of these amazing portraits, but then this completely abstracted background. And I just loved, I remember painting, I would get the subject in, but then how do I handle the background? So I studied his work a lot with background. There was the Alaskan artist named Sidney Lawrence, and being in Alaska, there's a lot of Sidney Lawrence influence, and I remember printing out and copying one of his Alaskan landscapes, and it was the first time because you can look at something and appreciate it, but if you try to recreate that scene and recreate color, you really have to dive deep into it, and it was the first time I ever dawned on me, he has some beautiful violet color in his birch trees. So, Sidney Lawrence, Nikolai Fechin. I mentioned Kwang Ho today as a inspiration. We were talking this morning about subject matter, and a lot of times people will say, what will you just paint like one subject matter? Because you're hard to pinpoint, and I'm like, I can't do that because I see the world as notes of color. And so when you really look at the world as color notes, it doesn't matter what you're painting. You could paint any subject. So because I'm intrigued with painting a lot of different genres, I've really tried hard to find my own voice. And Kwang Ho is one of those painters too. He can paint anything. He's highly accomplished that way. He can use multiple mediums. I mean, he's a true artist. So I would say those are kind of, there's a lot of amazing artists, contemporary and historic, that have had an influence on me, but I love the ones that are really doing something interesting and out of the box, thinking out of the box. Another goal has always been with me is trying to say more with less. I don't need to show the viewer that there's a foam pole there, or I want to do simplified strokes and let the viewer feel that painting and create their own story. So it's hard because you have to decide and determine what is needed in your painting and what you can keep out. Just moving right through again, and as you can see, darkest darks in the foreground closest to you, and then changing values. Values, if you're a painter, are drawing, the technical drawing. If you can have a painting that has the most beautiful paint application, but if something's off in the drawing, the anatomy's off, if the vanishing point perspective is off, the viewer can never get past that not being drawn correct. Versus if your drawing is spot on and the color is okay, it's still a successful painting. So having a painting that is drawn correctly is kind of the basic starting point for a successful painting. This one is a combination. I was experimenting. I'm always experimenting. I'm never happy. Always trying new things. So this was actually started out as a watercolor. I meant to layer it. So went from watercolor to gouache to oil on top. So I've got all three going on in here. And you can see like underneath that red, which I've changed the mast from the green boat in the background. I changed that to a red boat for that complementary color. But all these reflections, a lot of them are watercolor, and then just layered gouache, and then oil. So you can layer oil. Yeah, if you're going to layer like that, you have to make sure you're putting you can't layer a water-based medium over an oil-based medium. So if you're starting with acrylic or gouache, then you can layer oil on top.
What is your substrate to be able to do that?
I'm working on a watercolor panel. I could have worked on paper. I could have worked on an acrylic prime panel for that too. But because I started with watercolors, I kind of went with that embraced the watercolor.
If you had done that on paper, would you have mounted it for support ahead or after?
After, when it all dries. Yep. And I mount, if I'm painting in gouache or watercolor, I varnish it. I don't put anything under glass, because for me, having that interaction between the viewer and the artwork is super important. So I will varnish everything and no glass. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm getting the sign. Yes. Brush, palette knife. I use old credit cards. I use everything. There's a tool I really love, and you can see a lot. Well, you can see it up here in some of the branches up in the background. I get it on Amazon, just a rubber, it's like a 2-inch, and then I also have a 1-inch, that's a rubber scraper tool. So because I tone that background, I'll come back in and I'll just use that to score my branches and some of my trunks. That boat, I just didn't want that much of a red boat. I wanted a little more subtle with the focus on the figures, so I just changed the color of the boat and added my better color into the figures.
This talks to values and drawing, and I was wondering, do you use a grid system when you draw, or do you just
Draw. I think that's the years of architecture and years of drawing. I mean, a lot of artists use a grid system. I just freehand it in. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you determine where your quiet area in painting?
Well, first I determine my focal area, and then once I've established where that focal area is, then I start to work out and determine where my soft areas are. It's all the soft areas are determined to support the focal area.
When you do plein air, do you prefer use a gouache or oil?
Probably more and more gouache. Basically because it's simple. I can clean it up easy. I make a mess when I paint, so gouache is easy. It's easy to travel with. The tubes are really small. Yeah. We're gonna go. We're done? Okay. Oh, just speed it up. Okay. A nocturne. This was plein air actually. This was for Laguna Plein Air Invitational a few years ago, but. Once again, just nocturne, it's much lighter out there with all the lights than you expect it to be, and it's much lighter than what a photograph leads you to believe. So, just really wanted to play off the cool of the dark surrounding and then the warm of the light coming out through the building. Creative license, right? I just love this scene, but to me it was super monochromatic and not too exciting. So once again, playing off, really pushing the sand into the warm colors of the sand to juxtapose that against the cool of the water and to create some of that energy there. Also, kind of we're back to the bird comment, but I've added some sails on the boats to break up that strong horizon line up in the background. This is just a gouache. This was a plein air from my trip to Australia. Just a little different handling of the foreground, but warmest, darkest values right there in the foreground, moving up into the figure, and then graying down as you moved back up to the top, away from the focal. So creative license, right? And picking colors, you know, I think the one thing I wanted to really point out on this is how gray and blah the roof looks like on that house. But I wanted to pick a color that I knew was going to contrast with that and create that dynamic energy and support that, the highlight there. We were just, this was last year they did it, but in May I was invited to Catalina Island. There were 10 of us that went, and I actually got approved to drive their four-wheel drive rigs around the conservancy part of the island where the public can't go. So we spent, my friend Kathleen Hudson and I spent 8 days out on Catalina painting, and then this is their iconic casino there. So, you know, everyone has painted that casino from looking across at it. I'm like, I had painted a little bit differently. So we hiked up and took that photo from up above. But just adding some more interest into the foreground of the painting, and then really playing off where that light's hitting, it was right before sunset, so the light's coming and hitting the tops of those trees, and then moving into the cool temperatures as you go into the shadows. This one, I mentioned this because everything I do is planned and contrived. So this was a beach scene. I was just intrigued with the water, or with the fire. A lot of the elements are the same, but I've moved the figures around. And in fact, the girl with the dog, that's my dog, and my daughter, I had her pose that way in the kitchen. And so then I just used that as my model to insert into the painting. So I needed that element to stop you from going off. Keep your eye. Everything I want is to keep the eyes and the focus. Even the little green bucket down there against the red warm of the flame was just my choice to keep the viewer moving within this focal area fire part of the scene. Just a plein air piece from Italy. Really focused. This is a good example of those temperature shifts. Really pushing the cool in the shadows and against the warm where the light hitting. An example of what to leave out. You know, having all those homes in the background were not part of this story. I named this a full boat. And so really the focus was on the boat, and I didn't want to distract the viewer with some of the activity going on in the background. I'm going to go through these so I can show you my piece I'm working on. But once again, lightening those values. This was actually plein air too, but you can see how dark the values were if I was working from a photo. And losing the hard edges, kind of really getting a lot more vague with your approach as you move off the edges of the canvas. I had to look this one up because I was afraid after I painted it that those might be toxic weeds, but they're not. This one won an award at the Buffalo Bill Show last year. Again, leaving out, you know, kind of cropping in the scene, making it your own. Change the car that was red to yellow, just to create some interest around the focal part of the scene. Simplifying a busy background. So really, you know, starting, my focal with this was that string of red buoys. So I really get my darkest darks in, and then I just start working out and then simplifying and loosening my edges and graying down the color as you move toward the edges of the canvas. You can see, especially on this one, the boat on the right that's going off, I really do try to blend those edges going off the canvas so you don't have a hard edge. A gouache, making sure I don't have that background as dark as it shows in the photo. All right, this is my piece I'm working on. I'm going to be working on for the museum. And what I've done, I've gone in and I've established my darkest darks that are in a really light wash, and the darks in the foreground are warm because they're closest to you. And then the value is stepped back behind the left-hand horse and cooler, so it's a little less value and a little cooler. And then to create this, start to create this impression of depth, you can see the green trees off to the right are going to be a lot cooler, and even some additional value shifts as that foreground, as that person leading the train is going back into the background. So just creating some interest as you move into the painting, and then balance-wise, you've got your, we've got an angle that they're going up, but I'm counteracting that with the angle of the mountain that's going to be coming down behind. So I've got the counterbalance going, so I don't have everything, it's not it's not slanted too far one direction or another. This will be a 30 by 40. Yeah.
Sorry, what's that? Is that a power line that you have, or?
That's just, no, that's where the mountain's going to come down behind it. Yep, I'm just establishing my angles for that. Yes?
So what's your timeline on this, and how good are you at keeping the timeline?
Well, I don't have a lot of attention span, so I'll be painting on this until Wednesday. So I'll start tomorrow, and I'll paint. I started painting when my kids were really little, so I never got used to painting. I just paint in snippets of time. So I always, even now, set my timer for 2 hours, which is the maximum you can paint when you're painting plein air. So I will set my timer, and then I force myself to step back, take a break, look at it, because I think if you get 2 heads down, you get too detailed, it gets too boring. So I'll step back, but if I'm in the groove, if Kent doesn't talk to me too much, I can get it done. This is oil. Yep. Yep. Focal point is going to be some of these flowers up toward the upper left part of right behind that darkest horse. The focal point is going to be the flower, and then everything is going to recede from that. And also making sure where that you're consistently portraying the light source in the same direction, because I'm working off of quite a few individual reference photos for this one. So making sure that the light source is consistent.
Is it all horses will be warm tone color, or you want to?
Some will be warm, some will be cool, and then the one in the front, they'll get grayer and less saturated as you move to the right. Yeah. All right? Yes? They're going to be like sunflowers. Mm-hmm. Yep. Maybe some other things thrown in, just color notes, but yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's the plan.
So let's give Michelle a large round of applause. So just a couple of quick things. Like I said, you guys are welcome to come down to the Art Academy and bother her and talk to her while she's trying to paint. It wouldn't hurt if you know you're coming to maybe give me a call or send me an email just so we can be sure that she's there. So, but you're welcome
And
to
I
come
won't
down.
mind at all. I'm just only can't.
She's adamant that she does not mind, so feel free to come down. And then lastly, coming up in March 13th and 14th is our annual Gala Art Auction. And all the artwork that's going to be in that auction is now hanging in our members lounge. So when you're through here, feel free to walk over there and take a look and find something that when you want to come back in March and buy it, that would be great. So go over there and take a look. I think that's it.
Thank
you all for coming.
so much. If you have more questions, you